Hey all, so our family has procured a 2018 Fiat 500 that the wife drives, and the wife loves her Apple CarPlay, but the car did not come with Apple CarPlay. It was never an option in the US. So I have been charged with the task of installing a head unit in the Fiat that has Apple CarPlay. So to facilitate that, I have purchased this, an XTRONS PE72500FL head unit, specifically made for the Fiat 500. And what I have found is that there are absolutely no instructions available anywhere from the manufacturer or on YouTube or online as to how to actually install this. So I thought I would make a video, take you along on my journey of installing this, in the hopes that this might help somebody in the future. Alright, so what comes in the box? Well, we have the head unit itself, which as you can see is part number PE72500FL, specifically made for Fiat 500. I believe it's 2017 through 2019 models. And we have a whole mess of cables. Now I think this is the point where people who are not experienced with installing a head unit would look at this and say, I give up. But it's really not that difficult if you understand what's going on here. So in your car there already exists a wiring harness connected to the factory radio. What we need to do is take the signals from that factory harness and convert them physically into the connections needed for the new head unit. And that's what these cables do. This cable plugs into the factory harness that's in your car. And here are all the different outputs. Not all of these are needed. And over here we have the cables that plug into the back of the new head unit. And what we need to do is figure out which connections from the factory harness need to make it to the head unit and connect these ends to these ends when necessary. Now, these cables are not specific to the Fiat, so a whole bunch of these connections we're not going to be using, so don't let this scare you. Also included are two USB adapters for connecting USB devices to the new head unit. And we'll talk about that later. It's a special cable you want for that. And there's also this. This is the adapter that converts the factory AM/FM antenna harness so it'll plug into the new head unit. Now this is the most important piece. This is called the CANBUS module, and I'll explain what CANBUS is in a minute. So the first thing you should do if you're going to attempt this is to get yourself a wiring diagram that explains what all these connections are, so you have a better understanding of what connections currently exist in the car that have to make it to the head unit. So here I have a wiring diagram of this connection. See that? Now this specific diagram is not unique to the Fiat. This connector is used by many different Fiat Chrysler automobiles. But I've marked on the sheet which ones are used by the Fiat. So we have some connections here for CANBUS, and I'll explain that in a minute. We have some pins here for the auxiliary input connection that's done on the center console of the car. We have connections for a CD input, which in my case does not exist, but if you have a more advanced factory audio system, you might have a CD input on your head unit. We have the auxiliary detect, which works with this. I don't think it actually does anything. We have the backup camera connection here. Over here we have the antenna connection, which I believe is for the satellite, if you have satellite service. We have battery positive and ground, so power and ground coming into the radio. I mean, every radio needs that. That's where those are. And these 8 connections up here are for your speakers, 2 wires per speaker. Now in the Fiat that we have, there's an amplifier in the back trunk area of the car. So I believe that this wiring coming through the factory harness is actually going out to the amplifier. So the signal from the head unit will go through these wires back to the amplifier, and then from there it actually connects to the speakers. But that's a little kind of irrelevant to what we're talking about. So what is CANBUS? So modern cars have so many computers and so many electrical and electronic devices in them that wiring them all discretely, meaning physical wires going from each device to every other device that they have to connect to, is impossible. So the industry came up with a system called CANBUS, and that stands for Controller Area Network Bus. And basically what that means is you have a whole bunch of little computers located throughout your car. They're all connected by a network called CANBUS. And every electrical or electronic device in your car connects through discrete wiring to one of those controllers. Let's take your headlights for example. The switch for your headlights would be on the stalk next to your steering wheel. That's directly wired to the nearest controller, which is probably your instrument cluster. So when a signal comes into a controller from one of the devices connected to it, let's say you turn your headlights on, the controller converts your request into a data packet, and that's sent out over this car network or the CANBUS network. And the controller that your headlights are actually physically wired to receives that data packet that says, hey, turn the headlights on. And so that controller will perform some electronic magic inside and cause the headlights to come on. So the reason I'm explaining this is that for this head unit, there are several signals that it needs to function properly. For example, it needs to know when you put the car in reverse so it can activate the backup camera. It needs to know when you have applied the parking brake, because some head units won't let you play videos until the parking brake is turned on. That kind of information is being passed over the CANBUS network, and that is why we have this CANBUS module. It is specific to the Fiat 500, and it's programmed so that all of these CANBUS signals that are coming over these CANBUS wires, and there's only 2 of them to make this work, get properly interpreted and sent to the radio or the head unit so that everything functions properly. So that's what CANBUS is. So I think I've got this pretty well mocked up, and it's actually a lot simpler than it looks, trust me. So we have our factory harness here, cables kind of plug in here. This connector plugs into the back of the head unit. It provides the power, the ground, and the connections for the speakers. Here we have our CANBUS adapter, and the CANBUS signal comes from here through this connection, goes into the head unit. Here we have our backup camera connection. This connector goes into the back of the head unit. Here we have our auxiliary input adapters from the center console, goes into the head unit. Here we have 2 USB cables that plug into the back of the head unit to allow you to obviously connect USB devices. Now you can use them as is if you want these cables hanging out, but what you can do is buy a couple of these. These are Fiat specific USB adapters, so you can use the USB connections in the center console and the one in the glove box instead of having these cables hang out. So basically the cable from the USB connectors, they're already in your car, will terminate here. You plug that into this, you plug this into this, and then that goes into the head unit. So that should make for a nice clean install. I do not know what the difference is between the red colored one and the black colored one. The manual doesn't say anything about it. But once I start doing the install, we'll play around with it and see if we can figure out what the difference is, if any. So that's it. Looks worse than it is, trust me. Something I wanted to point out quickly before we head out to the car. All of these connections here are really well labeled. As you can see, we have on the harness side, we have our camera in signal, and on the head unit side, on its cable, it's also labeled camera in. Similarly, for our auxiliary inputs, we have auxiliary input left and right. Same label on this side, left and right. So it makes it really easy to find out which connections have to be made. But you're going to see some wiring over here on the head unit side. For example, here you've got one labeled brake, you've got one labeled reverse, and these are just bare wires. You're not going to use those. Those signals are coming through the CANBUS system. If you had a car that didn't have CANBUS or who didn't send these signals through CANBUS, then you would have to hardwire these into other wiring in the car. But for the Fiat, that's not necessary. So don't let those confuse you, okay? Alright folks, we're out in the car. The first thing I did was I disconnected the negative battery terminal on the battery in the engine compartment. That's because computers in the car will come on and off even with the car turned off. We don't want that happening while we're plugging and unplugging electrical things. Second thing you want to do all of your knobs here, turn them full left. There's a reason for that. You'll see that in a minute. Alright, next you're going to want some sort of prying apparatus. I have a plastic panel tool here. You could use a putty knife wrapped in masking tape. You want something that's not going to scratch the plastic. What you're going to do is you're going to get in here and pry the front face off. There. It's just held down with plastic clips. And we pull this off. And you'll see this is why we wanted to rotate these to the left. So then when we go to put this back on, it makes it a lot easier. You don't have to line up all the different dials. Next, you're going to need a number 20 Torx or a T20 Torx driver. You're going to remove the 2 screws here and here. With these 2 screws removed, we now need to pry off the orange panel here. It's just held down with clips. So use your plastic tool or whatever you're using, pry around the edges, and remove this panel. With all the clips undone, the panel pulls away. In theory. Here we have an electrical connector here. Here's the connector. I know it's a little hard to see. There's a little tab here. You pry this up slightly and this will come off the back of the color panel. With the panel removed, there's now 4 screws you have to remove. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are also T20s. With the 4 screws removed, this white panel is ready to come out. Just pull it straight out. There you go. Now with the panel removed, we have 4 screws to take out. 1, 2, 3, 4 to get the head unit out. Again, T20s. With the screws removed, we can now remove the head unit. And you can see behind it, we've got all these connections we have to deal with. So on the back of the radio, we have the main connector harness right here. We have this gray connector right here, which is probably our USB connector. We have an antenna connector for the AM/FM antenna, and we have the satellite radio antenna. Let's disconnect these. So we have the old head unit removed. So each of these connectors, see if I can get this in this shot. So this main harness, basically take this, pull up on it, and this will cam itself out. The blue one has a little tab on the bottom or the top that you press and pull it out. The white one does as well. Little tab here, pull that out. And the gray one, same deal. Little tab here, push it in, pull it out. So the XTRONS unit comes with a cable that allows you to adapt the built-in USB ports to the new head unit. But the problem is that the cable they include has no mechanism for actually holding the connections in place. So I went out and I bought this cable, and this has the proper connector on it, as you can see, that will lock these two in place so they won't come apart. And that part number is, can you see that? Got this off of Amazon. IMC Audio SKUSB-Mini USB 4. So definitely get one of these. Alright folks, you seeing this? So I've got everything hooked up for testing purposes. I've got the main harness attached here. I've got the USB, I've got the AM/FM antenna, and all the connections in the back. Now there's one connector in the back, it's labeled B on the instructions. We don't use that in the Fiat. Also have the USB cable hooked up through the adapter that I bought. So now let's get this set up temporarily and see if we can get this to work. Alright, so I've got the battery reconnected, and let's see what happens. Hey, we have power. That's a good sign. And we have a home screen. That's good. Doors are open and we're getting some radio. See if we can tune this in. Well, it's working off the bat. There's music we have to worry about content matching, but FM is working. So let me play around with it a little bit with phones and stuff like that, and we'll see what's working. I'll bring you back. Alright, I am back. So I've plugged in my Android device, and the head unit is seeing it, but because I'm not running a standard version of Android, I don't have Android Auto set up or installed on this phone. It's not capable. So let me play around with it a little bit more. But it's seeing the device, which is a good sign, right? So I just started the car, put it in reverse, and as hopefully you can see, there's a lot of sun out today. Reverse light or reverse camera works, and the guides work too. Pretty cool. So far everything is working right out of the box. I'm still messing around with trying to figure out some of the settings, but I'll bring you back when I find something important. Alright, at this point I'm pretty well satisfied that everything is working as it should, just the way we set it up earlier in the video with all the connections. So now I'm going to try to clean up all this mess of wiring so that I can set the head unit back in there permanently. What I'm going to use is I'm going to use this. I don't know if you can see it. Unfortunately, it's very bright outside and I'm having a hard time seeing what you're seeing. This is not electrical tape. This is called Tessa tape. Unlike electrical tape, which gets very sticky and leaves residue when it gets hot, and these dashboards do get hot, this is Tessa tape. It's a fabric-based tape. This is what the factory uses for tying up wiring. So I'm going to clean this up as best I can with the Tessa tape, and I'll bring it back and show you what it looks like. Alright, I think I've got this done up as well as it's going to get. I've mounted the CANBUS module here with double-sided tape, and I've used the Tessa tape to wrap up as many wires as I can. Now, the nice thing about the Tessa tape is that it provides some abrasion protection. So over the course of time, if these wires move around a little bit, they won't fray or cut themselves. I haven't cut any of the wires from the original harnesses. I don't like doing that. Basically what I found is that the USB cable, I wound that up and jammed it back here. Same with the antenna cable. You can get a few cables wedged way back in there. There's some extra space. And then the giant connector right here should fit underneath the radio here when you push it all back in. So yeah, I think this is about as good as it's going to get. Let me get this reinstalled and we'll see what happens. Alright, so now that I've got this back together, one thing I'll mention is that for all the plastic connectors that we used for all this wiring, I did wrap them in a soft foam and then wrap that in tape, with the idea being that now that they're kind of not plugged into the head unit itself, but they're a whole bunch of cables and they're bouncing around inside there, hopefully that will prevent rattling as the car goes down the road. One little trick you can use if you're in, you need to wrap something with electrical tape, or in this case Tessa tape, and you're in tight quarters and you can't get this whole roll to go around the wiring you're trying to secure. Take a length of this, wrap it around a common socket, and then you can wrap the small socket around the wiring that you're trying to secure. Definitely came in handy with this. So as you can see, I got everything back together. I'm going to go connect the battery and start messing around with this to make sure everything works. So the battery's been reconnected, and put the car into accessory mode and turn on the head unit, and the first thing you can see is that the head unit knows that the left door is open, which it is. That information is coming over the CANBUS network. So the CANBUS module isn't working properly. So if I close that, there we go. So CANBUS is working. This is cool. Okay, so after having played around with this for a little while, it would appear that everything actually works. So the auxiliary input works, the USB works. I'm not going to go through a complete tutorial of how to do this. I'm going to post a link in the description below for another YouTuber who posted a video more extensive about how to use this, but I'll mention a few things. There are a bunch of apps. You swipe left and right to get to them. Some of the important ones are Car Info. This is the menu for all of the various CANBUS options that you can set in this car. DSP is for changing the audio settings, you know, bass, treble, balance, those kinds of things. It actually sounds really good, better than the stock unit. AV-in, this application you'll use with the auxiliary input down there to play through that. That works, although it's a little bit quieter than the stereo itself. You have to turn up the volume a little bit. It does work. Topic switching. This allows you to change the theme on your display from the one that's stock to the one that's a little more modern, usable. This is nice. Okay. The instruction manual for this is here. Not that it's particularly useful, but it's there. Some of these options you're not going to use unless you have installed extra accessories, like torque is if you've installed the ODB2 adapter down there. It can transfer a whole bunch of car information to the unit, so you can see all sorts of different things going on, like turbo boost and any kind of other engine parameters that you normally wouldn't see through a head unit. You'd have to use like a scan tool for diagnostics. You can see those things here. So that's basically it. It's working. I can play music, but I can't because it's YouTube. You have an option for radio and Bluetooth music, Bluetooth settings. I've got an Android. It plays music through Bluetooth. It plays music through the auxiliary input. It's actually a real nice unit. I think the wife is going to be happy with it. So I apologize for kind of the haphazard organization for this video. I kind of did it on the fly. But I'll post a follow-up video after a while to let you know how the wife likes it and how we're getting along with it. If this has helped you at all, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks and have a nice day.